President Biden provided some detail on that, essentially saying that he told President Xi, don't let Chinese companies violate the sanctions on Russia, because if that were to happen, the U.S. would impose secondary sanctions.
President Joe Biden has set the geopolitical world on fire with a bold and fiery declaration telling China and Russia to get out. This isn't just a fleeting headline. It's a powerful statement that reverberates across international corridors and diplomatic circles everywhere. But what exactly sparked this dramatic declaration, and what does it mean for the balance of power worldwide? Are we witnessing the dawn of a new Cold War, or can diplomacy still prevail in these tense times? What's happening? In recent times, China and Russia have been stepping up their game, each flexing their muscles in their own way. Picture a global chessboard where every move is calculated and strategic. China, with its economic prowess and technological advancements, is playing an aggressive game to expand its influence, while Russia, with its military maneuvers and energy resources, is marking its territory. It seems the world has reached a stage where these superpowers are testing their limits, seeing just how far they can push. As the tension reaches high, Biden's declaration can be seen as a strategic countermove, signaling that the US is not one to take these developments lightly. Although his statement might sound straightforward, it's layered with the complexities of international relations and diplomacy. What caused Biden to make such a bold statement? Let me explain. Biden's bold stance. The message is clear. The US will protect its interests and allies against any potential overreach by these rising powers. By calling out China and Russia like this, Biden is not just speaking to their leaders. He's addressing the entire world, reinforcing the commitment of the US to maintain a global order that's underpinned by its leadership. Let's think for a moment about what Biden's message means for the economic landscape. The intertwined economies of these superpowers mean that shifts in one area can send reverberations through international markets. If Biden's warning leads to increased tensions or even open confrontations, we could witness major changes in global trade networks, alterations in alliances, and the recalibration of economic relationships. For businesses and nations alike, this new reality means adapting to rapid changes with agility and foresight. Politically, the stakes are equally immense. Countries around the globe might reassess their strategic alignments, driven by how this rivalry plays out. China and Russia's ambitions, coupled with Biden's unequivocal pushback, could lead to the formation of new alliances as nations decide where their own interests lie. What's more, this could redefine cooperative efforts on crucial global issues: climate change, cybersecurity, and global health, to name a few. Allies and adversaries alike are watching, assessing the implications of this bold American message. A tale of two powers. Can you believe how much the relationship between the United States and China has transformed over the last 2 decades? It's like watching an epic drama unfold, one that's full of surprising collaborations juxtaposed against intense confrontations. Ever since the early 2000s, we've seen a fascinating evolution in the way the United States and China interact with each other. The year 2001 marked a pivotal moment when China joined the World Trade Organization. That move was like unlocking a treasure chest that sent trade between them into a frenzy, sparking an era of rapid economic intertwining. Now, isn't that wild? But as with any complicated relationship, it hasn't all been smooth sailing. While that economic boom was playing out, folks in Washington were starting to squirm in their seats. Why? Because China's state-led development model was raising eyebrows, sparking concerns that this approach spelled unfair competition for American industries. Imagine being in a competition where one side is playing by a different set of rules. That's arguably how it felt for US officials. In this light, although trade relations were thriving on paper, simmering below the surface were tensions that began slowly creeping into the forefront. So what brought us to the current scenario where the tension is thick enough to cut with a knife? Buckle up, because the last few years have been a roller coaster of key events contributing to the strained US-China relations we see today. Let's start with the trade war, a biggie. Back in 2018, then President Trump kicked off a tit-for-tat tariff battle targeting goods worth hundreds of billions of dollars. It was like throwing a match into a powder keg, spotlighting long-standing grief over perceived unfair trade practices and sending ripples across global markets. And just when you thought things couldn't get more complicated, enter the Hong Kong protests of 2019. These demonstrations erupted as a response to China's tightening grip on Hong Kong's autonomous status. Washington didn't mince words in in its disapproval, which led to sanctions hurled against certain Chinese officials. Talk about diplomatic drama. The protests were a stark reminder of the ideological divides between the American democratic ethos and China's authoritative governance. Then came the curveball, the COVID-19 pandemic. Perhaps no other event in recent history has thrown as much gasoline on the geopolitical fire between the US and China. As the world grappled with the crisis, both nations were quick to point fingers over the virus's origins and how it was managed. This blame game only served to further fray an already delicate rapport. It was as if the pandemic held up a magnifying glass to the mistrust that had been quietly ballooning between them. And let's not forget about Taiwan, an ongoing geopolitical hot potato that keeps cropping up in discussions. Despite being a tiny island, Taiwan's significance in US-China relations is anything but small. The escalating military activities by China near Taiwan have kept the world on edge, prompting the US to reaffirm its support for Taiwan's defense capabilities. This dynamic is reminiscent of a high-stakes chess game where each maneuver is met with equal counterplay, keeping allies and adversaries on their toes. But what has really triggered President Joe Biden's recent no-holds-barred warning to China and Russia? Geopolitical chess. We're talking about big moves on the geopolitical chessboard, ones that have Washington pretty concerned, and rightly so. These developments aren't just the everyday dip and dive of international relations, they're game changers. Let's start off with those eye-catching military exercises. Picture it, China and Russia teaming up for joint military drills right near Taiwan's doorstep. It's like two powerhouse neighbors throwing a backyard barbecue that's a little too loud and way too close to the fence. This isn't just a friendly meetup, it's a strategic show of force that rings alarm bells across the Pacific. Washington's leaders are on high alert, interpreting these exercises as not just routine, but as indicators of potential coordinated aggression. It's almost as if both nations are testing how far they can go before someone says, hold on a second. Then there's the whole scenario involving Russia and Ukraine, a complex conflict that's been ongoing but saw a fresh twist with reports about China's involvement. Allegedly, China has been slipping Russia some material support, even as the rest of the global community raises eyebrows and voices against what's happening in Ukraine. This isn't the kind of teamwork that gets nods of approval at the United Nations. Instead, it's stirring up concerns over whether China's actions might be in violation of international norms and just how deep its complicity might run in such a contentious issue. Let's tackle another digital frontier buzz: cyber attacks. If cyber warfare sounds like something out of a thriller movie, that's because it's equally riveting and just as alarming. Allegations have been surfacing about cyber intrusions orchestrated by Chinese state-sponsored actors, targeting key pieces of US infrastructure. Imagine hackers sneaking around virtual corridors, making themselves at home in critical systems and networks. For US officials, these activities aren't just a poke, they're a full-on security threat that demands immediate action and precaution. So now let's get into the recent changes in US tariff laws that are shaking up both American and Chinese markets. These changes aren't just your run-of-the-mill policy tweaks, they represent a significant escalation in tensions between the United States and China, especially in key industries like electric vehicles, solar panels, and semiconductors. Biden's tariff strategy. On May 14th, 2024, President Joe Biden dropped a bombshell announcement. The US would be hiking tariffs on about $18 billion worth of Chinese imports, impacting 14 crucial product categories. That's not pocket change. We're talking serious alterations designed to protect the US economy and realign the trade playing field. But what exactly are these changes, and how might they redefine the landscape for both countries? The US didn't just raise tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, they cranked them up from 25% to a jaw-dropping 100%. It's like turning up the volume past the maximum setting. The administration argues that this is necessary to shield American electric vehicle manufacturers from aggressive pricing tactics that are perceived as, well, unfair. These tactics include practices like hefty subsidies that make it hard for local producers to compete on an even footing. Let's talk about solar panels, a component as vital to the US renewable energy sector as sunlight itself. Here, the story is similar. Tariffs have been sharply increased with an aim to rein in China's stronghold over solar manufacturing. Many point fingers at China's state-backed subsidies, accusing them of artificially lowering global prices and squeezing competitors, especially those in the US. Now, let's turn to semiconductors. If tech were a kingdom, semiconductors would be its crown jewels. The tariffs on these high-tech essentials are set to rise from 25% 30% today to 50% by 2025. This isn't just about numbers, it's part of a grand strategy to safeguard America's technological edge against what officials label as China's unfair competition. Think of it as a protective shield for one of the most pivotal industries of the future. Oh, and don't forget the steel and aluminum sectors. The tariffs here are set for a steep climb, moving from a modest range of 0.75% to a solid 25% come August 2024. It's a calculated move aimed at slowing the flood of low-priced Chinese products that could threaten the survival of US manufacturers. It's a big swing, but officials say it's necessary to level the playing field. What's the overarching justification for all these moves? The US government's mantra seems to be protection. Protection of American workers, industries, and intellectual properties from what they describe as China's unfair trade practices, like forced technology transfers and intellectual property theft. They're not just minor grievances, these are serious accusations with hefty economic ramifications. As for US markets, the ripple effect could lead to higher consumer prices, especially in sectors heavily dependent on imports from China. However, US officials are spinning it positively, claiming these measures will eventually revitalize domestic production and open up job opportunities in essential industries. It's a high-stakes gamble that could generate long-term gains, though not without some short-term pain. And let's not forget that the story doesn't end here. There is another fascinating twist in the world of global commerce: nearshoring to Mexico. Picture this: rising costs in China, geopolitical saber rattling, and the whole COVID-19 shebang. It's enough to make any business scramble for a strategy makeover. So what's the game plan? Many US companies are pulling up stakes and bringing their manufacturing operations closer to home. It's not just about cutting costs, it's about making supply chains more resilient and responsive. And where are they heading? South to sunny Mexico, of course, where logistics are a breeze compared to dealing with oceans in between. Then let's talk about the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. It's not just ink on paper, it's a symbol of strong economic ties, smoothing the path for more trade between the US, Mexico, and Canada. More bilateral trade, more economic opportunities. It's a win-win, especially for businesses looking to dodge the hurdles of international tariffs and complexities. Speaking of hurdles, let's flip to China. Faced with hefty US tariffs aimed straight at their wallets, some Chinese firms are getting creative. Ever heard of manufacturing relocation? It's happening right now. Chinese companies are packing up their production lines and setting up shop in Mexico. By relocating, they're sidestepping the tariff traps that sorely hit imports coming directly from China. Think of it as a strategic chess move, positioning themselves just across the border but within striking distance of the US market. And they're not stopping there. We're seeing a complete rethinking of supply chains. Companies are now weaving Mexican suppliers and manufacturers into their networks. This clever strategy ensures that similar goods can still make it to the US without those crippling tariffs. It's like playing a game of trade tag where staying nimble and unpredictable is key to keeping in the game. What we're witnessing is more than just trade adjustments. It's globalization in action. Businesses everywhere are hunting for ways to stay savvy amidst these evolving trade policies. They're looking for cost-effective solutions to maintain their edge in a fiercely competitive market landscape. It's like a global relay race where companies are continuously passing the baton to keep up with rapid changes. Biden's economic revolution. Let's dive into how the US is tackling the beast of unfair competition head on. Spoiler alert, it's all about creating a fair and competitive environment where American industries can really shine. Picture this: by beefing up the economy through strategic measures, we're talking about a landscape that's not just fairer, but chock full of opportunities for growth. It's like giving everyone a fair shot at the gold medal, right here on home turf. One thing that Biden is doing is job creation, one of the big aims behind these moves. Let's chat numbers. Since Biden stepped into the Oval Office, the US has added nearly 800,000 manufacturing jobs to its roster. That's a hefty number. Oh, and factory construction? It's taken off like a rocket, doubling compared to past years. These aren't just stats to throw around. They're part of a grander vision to breathe new life into American manufacturing. Imagine cutting down on the made in somewhere else labels in favor of boosting homegrown production. It's all about reducing that pesky reliance on foreign supply chains while revving up our own industrial engines. Then there's the focus on targeted sectors, which isn't just boardroom babble, it's a calculated move. The tariffs have a laser focus on areas considered pivotal for national security and economic backbone. We're peering into advanced manufacturing corners like semiconductors and renewable energy technologies. With China looming as a tech and manufacturing powerhouse, the US is on a mission to steal back a bit of that competitive thunder. It's like gearing up for an industry showdown to reclaim the top spot in innovation and capability. stability. And this isn't just a flash in the pan kind of strategy. Nope, it's part of a long-term game plan. The increased tariffs aren't merely knee-jerk reactions, they're chess moves in a more profound strategic effort to shake up US-China trade relations from the ground up. Picture this: by keeping the heat on China with these economic maneuvers, the Biden administration isn't just aiming for temporary wins. The hope is that the sustained pressure nudges Beijing toward more equitable trade practices. Meanwhile, back home, the focus is on fueling growth and dynamism across domestic industries. Strengthening alliance. By weaving a tight-knit fabric of partnerships, particularly with Japan, the US is crafting a robust strategy designed to counter threats and secure a balance of power in the region. First on the agenda is the US-Japan relationship, a cornerstone in this geopolitical chess game. Why is this bond so crucial, you ask? It's all about enhanced military cooperation. Japan and the US have been tightening their military boots, engaging in joint exercises that demonstrate their united front against potential Chinese aggression. We're talking about beefing up defense spending and honing capabilities to keep China in check, especially when it comes to sticky issues like territorial disputes in the East China Sea and the ever-sensitive status of Taiwan. On Japan's part, they've gone on a full-scale military upgrade, pouring resources into advanced missile systems and boosting naval prowess, all tailored to counter the burgeoning might of the Chinese military machine. But it's not just about flexing military muscle. Economic partnerships form another critical layer of this alliance. Beyond defense drills and strategy meetings, the US and Japan are also shaking hands on economic fronts, tackling challenges from supply chain snags to tech innovation sharing. Both countries have their eyes set on a mutual goal, addressing China's trade maneuvers while staying competitive in the ever-evolving global marketplace. It's a partnership that promises shared growth and resilience against any economic curveballs China might throw their way. Don't think the US is stopping at Japan, though. This strategic blueprint extends well beyond a single partnership. It's about rallying a band of allies, the plan to collaborate with other regional heavyweights like Australia, South Korea, and India. The US is actively sculpting a coalition throughout the Indo-Pacific to present a unified front against the rise of Chinese power. Imagine joint military spectacles, clandestine intelligence exchanges, and synchronized action plans across the region, all aimed at quelling any looming threats from China's rise. And we can't forget about global trade frameworks. The US isn't just aiming for military alignment, but is also advocating for fair competition on the trade stage. By spearheading reforms through platforms like the World Trade Organization, the Biden administration is striving for accountability and equity in international trade. It's not just about keeping China in check, it's about crafting a global trading environment where fair play isn't just an ideal, but a reality. In this intricate dance of diplomacy, military might, and economic savvy, the overarching theme is one of unity. The US isn't operating in a vacuum, but is weaving a tapestry of alliances that promise not just security, but prosperity in an uncertain world. Impact on the supply chain. The tensions ramping up between the US and China are revolutionizing trade on a massive scale, pushing us all towards a multipolar world. It's like a giant puzzle, where each piece falls into place with a long-term strategy that focuses on boosting domestic production and tackling international rivalries head-on. But how exactly are these tensions shaking things up? Let's talk about this idea of a shift to a multipolar world. Rising friction between these two giants, the US and China, is creating ripples across global trade dynamics. One of the major themes here is the decoupling of economies. Imagine the US actively taking steps to untangle itself from China's economic grip. It's happening, and it's not just a political soundbite. The US is boosting domestic production by dialing down its reliance on Chinese imports. You can see this shift in action through recent tariff hikes on major Chinese products like electric vehicles, solar panels, and semiconductors. The motive? To shield US industries from what they view as unfair practices in China's state-supported manufacturing. We're also seeing new players come into focus as alternative trade partners take center stage. As America looks to scale back its economic ties with China, countries such as Mexico, India, and Vietnam are stepping into the spotlight. This emerging shift in trade dynamics has even seen US-Mexico trade surpass US-China trade for the first time ever. How wild is that? Nearshoring is the name of the game, with businesses finding it much safer and more economical to bring manufacturing closer to home. It's a savvy way to dodge the complexities and risks of tariffs and supply chain disruptions. Of course, this dramatic reconfiguration of supply chains is part of the scene too. Businesses are on a mission to diversify away from their ties to Chinese production. We could be on the cusp of witnessing a surge of investment into Southeast Asian and Latin American nations, where the labor costs won't break the bank and regulations are becoming increasingly investment friendly. Imagine a complex web of supply chains spread across diverse lands, nations, redefining the map of global commerce. But that's not all. There's a realignment of economic partnerships underway, a fascinating response to the growing tensions. The US isn't going it alone. It's busy reinforcing relationships with traditional allies in the Indo-Pacific region. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia are all in the mix. How, you ask? Through stronger military collaborations and economic pacts designed to counterbalance China's expansive influence. Take Japan's military expansion in response to Chinese aggression, for instance. It's a prime example of strategic alignment getting real. And what about those regional trade agreements sprouting up like wildflowers? We're seeing nations unite to strengthen economic bonds that don't lean on China. Agreements like the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership are gathering steam as countries jostle to fortify their stake in this shifting landscape. It's like a dance of agreements with an eye toward keeping ahead in the ever-changing economic theater. Then there is investment in strategic sectors that is ramping up. Nations are intent on focusing their sights on tech, renewable energy, and essential minerals to trim down dependencies on Chinese supply chains. The US isn't sitting quietly on the sidelines with its Investing in America agenda. It's a call to rally private sector investments domestically while keeping spirits high with global partners. It's all about securing pivotal industries and staying resilient in this play of global trade dynamics. Reviving American manufacturing. President Biden's plans to reshape America's economic future are all centered around this ambitious concept called the Investing in America agenda. Think of it as the backbone of Biden's economic strategy, aiming to stage a colossal comeback for American manufacturing. Here's the deal. Over $860 billion has been pumped into sectors like electric vehicles, clean energy, and semiconductors. This isn't just pocket change. It's about rewriting the narrative of American industry, lifting it from the shadows where offshoring had left it for decades. This monumental drive is fueled by significant legislation, such as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors for America Act and Science Act, both key players in this investment blitz. It's like reviving a sleeping giant, preparing it to tackle tomorrow's challenges. Speaking of global competition, this agenda isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving against fierce contenders like China. Picture this. Through a concentrated effort to boost domestic production capabilities, the US is setting the stage to buttress itself against international competition. By zeroing in on sectors critical for future growth, think semiconductors and tech innovations, the goal is to reignite America's flair in technological leadership. It's about making sure that the surge in technological advancement trickles down to benefit American workers, creating a cycle of prosperity and innovation. Of course, where there's action, there's often reaction. China's got plays of its own to make, which could come in the form of retaliatory tariffs against US exports. Such back-and-forth measures might just whip up the winds of an ongoing economic showdown, making you wonder where this path of confrontation might lead. As the book on US-China relations inches forward, what we're witnessing is the dawn of long-term strategic competition. It's not merely about trade, it's like a chess match stretching into arenas of technological development, military readiness, and even geopolitical clout. This strategy between the superpowers is setting the scene for a narrative of competition rather than cooperation, raising a compelling question about the future of international relations. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments below.